Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the Peru Venture Capital Conference. Today, I am in the panel Migrating to Latin American Countries for Launch. We are joined by Nima Pourchap from Minu and Florence Frech from Leal. My name is Laure Schlesinger. I'm the COO and co-founder of the fintech Prestamipe, and I will be in charge of moderating this panel. So welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure for us that you can be part of the Peru Venture Capital Conference. So before starting the conversation, I would like to introduce myself. So as I said, I'm the co-founder of Prestamipe. Prestamipe is a Peruvian fintech that focuses on providing financing to micro and small companies. Well, I was born in France and I also studied in France. I came to Peru 8 years ago and I launched Prestamipe 4 years ago. So now Nima and then Florence, please could you tell us a little more about you before we begin with the questions and the conversations?
Sure, thank you, Laura, great to be here. My name is Nima, I'm born in Iran. My parents were refugees from the Iranian Revolution and they got political asylum in Spain. So I grew up in Spain, which is why the Spanish accent is stuck. Did a university in the UK and then worked in consulting covering Middle East and Africa mostly. Did my MBA in the US and now have been close to a decade in Latin America. Spent a couple of years in Argentina, sometime in Chile, a couple of years in Brazil, a year in Colombia, and since then I've been in Mexico, now based out of Mexico. And I'm the CEO and co-founder of Minu. We're a employee financial wellness platform. We're the market leader of salary on demand, which we give 24/7 instant access to wages which have already been earned to employees. And we're working now with more than 100 companies, some of the largest employers in the country, with 300,000 employees on our platform.
Great, thank you, Nima. Please, can you tell us more about you?
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for the invitation. Very happy to be here. I'm Florence. I am the co-founder of Leal, co-founder and COO of Leal. I was born and raised in El Salvador in Central America, and I did my undergrad and grad school in the US, as well as a time in investment banking, both in the US and Central America. I always wanted to come back to the region, and I met my current co-founder in our MBAs in the US, and given our backgrounds advising retail companies to make their marketing spend much more efficient, we launched Leal. And Leal was born in 2016, and it's currently Colombia's fastest growing rewards platform. So we aim to bring Latin Americans, because we operate in 5 different countries, we aim to bring Latin Americans an opportunity to save with rewards programs, and lately we launched our digital currency called Leal Coins, in which you can earn cash back and spend it on everyday goods.
Great. So, well, as you can see, we have a very international panel, so I think it's going to be very interesting. So maybe to start the conversation, which is about migrating to Latin America in order to launch a startup. You already mentioned it a little bit in your presentation, but why did you come to Latin America the first time, and how did you come to the decision of launching a startup? Was it we already know that it was maybe after having already professional experience here in Latin America, or maybe it was during the studies that you saw an opportunity. So can you tell us more details about that? And maybe Florence, if you want to begin.
Sure. I worked in investment banking in Central America for 2 years prior to my MBA, and having worked in the States, I really noticed the amount of opportunity that Latin America has. So I think, honestly, that at least in the retail space, there was so much opportunity for us to help them with consumer engagement and data-focused marketing, that for us, it was just a huge opportunity in a market that we both grew up in and we knew very well. So I think, and I still, 6 years later, I still believe that Latin America is full of opportunities, and that starting companies and entrepreneurship is the way to reach those opportunities. That's sort of how I ended up. I knew going into my MBA that I wanted to come back to Latin America. I didn't know that I was going to become an entrepreneur. I'm very happy I did, but it wasn't that clear to me in the beginning. But I did know that Latin America was my preferred region. I wanted to come back.
Okay, great. And Nima, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add very similar to Florence is, I think the answer to that question, if you were to ask me why come to Latin America now versus why I came now around 10 years ago, I think it's very different. So my case, it was coincidental. I was working for a startup based out of New York that started operations in Argentina. I came to Argentina, and then very similar. I saw the what I thought was opportunity and launched. This is my second company actually in South America. The first company failed, right? It started in Argentina, grew to Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and then failed. And this is my second company. But I think what's interesting is, as Florence mentions, the need, and there's clearly a lot of potential in Latin America, and that has been the case. I think the difficulty has always been a timing question. And I really do think the timing is now, right? I mean, the opportunities of Latin America have always been there, and we always thought this is the year when, but I think now, the stars have got aligned. So now you've got the stuff that you need for those opportunities to realize. You've got the capital, you've got all this appetite from VCs, from both equity and the debt side. You've got the entrepreneurs of quality, which are coming with experience, which are coming from top schools around the world. And you've got the success stories, right? You're starting to get the unicorns in Brazil, unicorns in Mexico. So we're seeing the successes. So I think there's the kind of the macro need and opportunity, and is now finally that the timing is the right timing, right? And I think the proof of that is we're just seeing flow of top business school MBA guys come and set up shop and either start projects or join projects. We're seeing a lot of the VCs now play a very active role and fighting over deals. So I think that the timing now is right. It's exciting.
Yeah, and the question of timing resonates for me because we launched Prestami Pay in Peru 4 years ago, and there was maybe one investment fund in Peru. And now, well, there are 3. It's better than before. But for example, when we began, almost nobody was speaking about fintech. And now you have more than, I think, 200 fintechs in Peru, and it has been accelerating a lot. And I feel really that time is changing. I think maybe in Colombia or Mexico, you are more advanced than Peru. I feel maybe Peru is Colombia 5 years ago in terms of the investment ecosystem, especially the funds are really missing here in Peru. But we have some funds from Colombia, from Mexico that are beginning to invest in Peru. So yeah, I can totally feel what you are saying about timing. And I hope that, well, it will motivate more entrepreneurs to come to Latin America and take this opportunity. So you already mentioned it, but maybe if you can contrast with the country where you let's say the States, because you both study in the States. What kind of opportunities do you see here in Latin America? It can be in your startup sector specifically, or in general, as you like, that is different from from the US, let's say. What do you see that you have here? A kind of opportunities that doesn't exist or is different than in the US. Who wants to begin?
I'll take it. So I think that for us, it was part of starting the company. The idea came from living in the US and seeing how most loyalty programs were doing a very good job bringing data to retailers. So coming from the retail industry, I knew exactly what the pains of the retailers were. And then at Kellogg, where I did my MBA, we were seeing the dying wave of Groupon and discounts and the rising wave of data and business intelligence. And And I remember spending the summer between the first and the second year during our MBAs here in Colombia, in Bogota, just talking to retailers and understanding if this was really a problem. And it was astonishing to me how little data they had from their consumers and how little they invested in consumer engagement and the amount of things that the US retailers were doing, but that the Latin American retailers were not. And for us, it was just a market that we knew really, really well. And how could we bring that, tropicalized, but bring that value to Latin American retailers. And that was sort of how Leal was born. And then eventually Leal migrated into, we still have the loyalty platform, but we've migrated into a more holistic approach of cashback and rewards. And we're becoming the preferred savings app for Colombians and Central Americans. And with that in mind, we've really seen that the needs are different for both retailers and consumers, but the US is sort of steps ahead in terms of using data to help both retailers and consumers. So for us, that was sort of the opportunity that we grasped. And I honestly don't regret it. There's a huge need in LATAM to do that.
So Florence, would you say that it was more kind of a horizontal innovation where you saw an idea that was working in the US and you took it to Latin America and you, as you said, you had to tropicalize it? Would you say it was in that kind of innovation?
No. I mean, we saw at least 45 working loyalty programs in the US, and Leal is like none of them, like exactly equal to none of them. We've sort of built our value proposition around what retailers in Latin America need. But I think that what we saw in the US was the need and the use of data. That's what we were seeing that companies in Latin America weren't leveraging because they didn't have a way to collect the data. But how we do it, what we do, and the value we bring to them are all very, very, very different because they're tailored to retailers in Latin America, which are extremely different than retailers in the United States. So I would say I wouldn't really call it horizontal innovation. I would say that we got inspired based on what we saw, but it was really a data play. And yeah, we just used the idea of bringing all that data to retailers.
Great. And Nima, tell us in your case, how was it?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we fell in love with the problem of just lack of financial wellness in Mexico, because it's just so visible, right? And it's just so alarming. I mean, this is a country where 3/4 of the population live from paycheck to paycheck, right? There's no savings. There's a third of the adult population is getting loans out just to cover their recurring expenses. And it's just visible on your day-to-day, right? I mean, you see people lining up in front of pawn shops, right? You see people lining up in front of a cash machine to get money on the day where they're getting paid to be able to go out for lunch, right? So it's a very visible project. It's a very visible problem, right? And I think there's tons of those, there's so much infrastructure missing. There's such low levels of satisfaction because a lot of the industries are controlled by few players. So I think in terms of finding a problem that exists here versus the US, an entrepreneur should just come and spend some time here. I think they will find one. I think what's also exciting is, and Florence is a great example of it, is I think a few years back there was a lot of, I'm going to bring this model to LATAM, or I'm the X of LATAM. And I think now we're seeing completely different, right? We're seeing companies that are, born up from the ground up and are expanding globally, right? And I think that's a reflection of the potential of LATAM entrepreneurs, right? Which is not now bringing, there's not geographic arbitrage now. Now it's, starting to build projects which start in LATAM, but with a very kind of world mentality and with ambitions to grow globally. I think that there's definitely challenges, right? The ecosystem is way younger here, right? So, and that has its implications, right? I mean, it's like, there's not a startup culture. It's hard to hire. Most of the people that we have in our teams, the first time they're working in a startup, right? They're still very relationship based, kind of the way of doing business. It's a bit more difficult to crack. So there's definitely got its challenges, but I think that's where the opportunity lies, right? I think there's so much to do here, and it's such a huge market with so much demand, and with such a low level of satisfaction in so many of the solutions, that if you're able to get over that initial hump and figure out how to sell, figure out how to hire, the opportunity is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have mentioned several topics that we will explore later in the conversation. Well, in our case in PrestamiPay, the idea was really born locally. We identified that the entrepreneurs in Peru had a huge lack of access to funding. And especially, I think one way of identifying an opportunity in Latin America is seeing how are people solving this problem right now. So what happened 4 years ago is that they would go to informal lenders that would charge a super huge interest, and of course they didn't pay any tax, and it could be even dangerous. But they had a model where they would use real estate guarantee as a collateral of the loan. And so we said, okay, that's a good idea because it allows more entrepreneurs to access to credit, entrepreneurs that don't have any credit history. But how can we do it in a modern way using technology, giving much better conditions to the entrepreneurs? So we took this very super traditional way of lending money and we transformed it into a fintech, right? And today we are the biggest lending fintech in Peru. So I think it's just like a tip for maybe the audience. Try also to not only, and as you said, not only I want to be the Uber of Latin America, I want to be the Airbnb of Latin America. Try to look for local problems. Try to see how people are solving them right now, and on that, how you can transform the current solutions into a new and innovative solution. And of course, try to focus on a problem that as financial inclusion, for example, that a lot of countries in Latin America have. But I think going from a local problem and then trying to internationalize it is a good way of doing things. So, well, we have a really a lot of topics to discuss, and it's very interesting to see your point of view. So, for example, you mentioned the talent problem, right? Especially a few years ago, it was harder to find talent in Peru. So I would have two questions here. So first, how did you find your co-founders? Were them local co-founders, or were there also foreigners? And second one, how did you build your team, especially the technology part of the team, and well, all the key human resources in your startup? So yeah, it would be on the co-founders and the team. So maybe Nima, this time you can begin.
Yeah, sure. So we are three co-founders. Myself, Iranian Spanish, another co-founder who's Spanish, another one who's Italian. So the three of us are foreigners. Very Mexicanized. I mean, we've been in Mexico between 6 to 15 years. My two co-founders are married to Mexicans and Mexican children. And I think kind of what joined us was, the three of us wanted to contribute to a country that has given us so much, right? And that we feel it's our home. And also, we thought the best way to contribute is to try to solve a problem which we see is damaging so much the country, right? I think, financial stress, not only does it affect just individuals, mental health, physical health, productivity, and so on, but it just affects companies, affects the country's GDP, right? So we thought that's a big lever to have a big impact on what we're looking for. The way we met, two of us, we know each other from back in the consulting days. We know each other from 13 years ago. And we went different paths in life. And then we ended up, he was a partner at a consulting firm at Oliver Wyman in Mexico City. When I came to Mexico City, we reconnected. And then we both ended up working actually at a bank together. I was the head of a retail bank. He was the CEO of the bank. And we left there to start Minu. We met our third co-founder by just pure luck. We cannot give ourselves credit to that. We met him, a headhunter introduced us to him on a Tuesday. Told us, the first thing he told us, but guys, I'm leaving on Sunday to become the CTO of a bank in Colombia. So, so we met him on Tuesday, again on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday, we went to see him and gave him an offer and spent the whole day convincing him. And Sunday, he called us to tell us he's canceled his flight. So I think a lot of that was basically luck. But I think what's very important for us is the fact that all of us have set our anchor in Mexico, right? I mean, this is what we consider home. This is where we want to build our families, our future, and so on. And the way we built our team initially was, the co-founders are international, but the team is very international itself. But our management team entirely is mostly Mexican, right? And the way we initially built it, one of my co-founders, the CTO, he'd been CTO of a few different organizations. So he was able to kind of, pool and cherry pick backend, front end, mobile, UX guys he'd worked with. And then we started kind of building our sales team. I think what's become very difficult about hiring, and it's interesting, the problem has radically changed. There was a problem, I think, 2 years ago that it was hard to convince people to leave their traditional jobs to come and join a startup. Yeah, it was just the social connotations of a startup were just not that attractive. And now suddenly and very quickly, and I think that's an interesting observation, that things just suddenly change. The problem has become the other way around, right? That there's just too much capital, there's too many startups, and people are fighting over specific type of talent, which there's not too much of, right? There's not too many product managers, there's too many data scientists. And that has happened very quickly. And I think the challenge has gone from how do you convince them to join startup and the potential of a startup? How do you make them fall in love with your mission and kind of the way that you operate, versus how do you convince them to join your startup versus a bunch of other startups? And I think the most important implication there is, hiring has become tough, right? So we're seeing a lot of not just compensation that's above kind of market, but we're seeing a lot of inflation in roles, right? We're seeing, marketing managers becoming CMOs, and I think that's going to cause a lot of management debt down the line. So we've gone through, the difficulty of convincing people to now a lot of people want to join, and we're just fighting over it because there's too much capital and too little talent.
And what do you mean, Nima, by management debt?
That you will have to pay. You're doing something that in the future you will have to pay back. It's like code debt, right? That you do code too quickly, and so if you bring, I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot right now happen in the Mexican market is we're seeing people join in roles which are probably higher or more senior than the roles, especially becoming heads of or chiefs of certain areas. And I think that could be a very costly mistake, right? Just in able to attract someone who has different offers, you give him a higher role, right? Because that's the person who's going to manage the team under them, and that's the person who's going to build that function. And if that person is not the right person, it actually becomes quite costly to replace them down the line, right? And that's what I mean with management debt from inflation of roles.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip for the entrepreneurs that are listening to us. Florence, do you want to comment on the co-founders, the team, and maybe the issues that Nima pointed out?
Sure. So my co-founder and I met during our MBA. He is Colombian, and he is a second-time entrepreneur. So this is his second company. His first company wasn't a startup, but it was an e-commerce of tourism and activities in Colombia when there was no tourism in Colombia. So that was, he was sort of learned a couple of lessons there, and he went to his MBA thinking he wanted to come back and start another company in LATAM, but he didn't want to do it alone. So I guess that he went to his MBA thinking that. I went to my MBA thinking I wanted to come back to Latin America, but I did not want to do investment banking again. So I was very open to opportunities. I come from an entrepreneurial family, but I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. And I think that, I guess just like Nima, life brought us together, and we just, a little bit of luck too. We are incredibly complementary. He's, very sales oriented, very strategic, and I'm very operations, day-to-day oriented. And I think that working the first couple of quarters or semesters at our MBA together helped us figure out how we were complementary in that, and in that level of being complementary allowed us both to focus on what we wanted the most. So I didn't want to focus on sales. I couldn't sell a thing when I started my company. I mean, I've learned, but I hated sales. I still don't love it. But he loves sales. So, and I also feel like that finding that balance in both doing what we liked, and the fact that each one liked very different things was absolutely crucial, and has been absolutely crucial to our success. And yeah, I mean, I think it was the other good thing was that when we decided that we were launching the company in LATAM, I came to Bogota for the first time. I loved Bogota, I loved Colombia, I loved the people here for my first couple months. And then I think it was also a good decision to launch here because at least one of us knew the industry, had worked here before, had contacts, understood the rules. And you know, it wasn't like we were both completely new. Like, I'm sure that was probably a challenge for Nima, and well, he had lived there before, but I'm sure that was challenging. Starting at what I mean to say is that really starting a company is challenging enough. I think that it was, for us, it was critical that one of us at least knew the market before. So, I mean, I think that down the line, I've also realized that I got very lucky. I think that choosing a co-founder has a lot more to do about values and principles and sharing certain things and vision in terms of where you want to go and what you want to do with your life. Because being an entrepreneur is almost like, it's like a life project, you know. It's sometimes you tell yourself that you want to go on vacation and disconnect, but it's, you both know this too.
No vacation for entrepreneurs.
It's part of who you are. And I think that having good partners is critical to also enjoying it. You know, I think that one of the key things that I always tell people when they ask me about my partnership is you want to have someone that you have a very, very, very heated debate with, and you know, it gets to the point where it's, you know, you're arguing, and then at the end of the meeting, you can both go grab a beer and, you know, nothing happened. It's that type of thing, that someone that will challenge you and push your limits, because that's what the company needs. But it's also, but it's also someone you admire, respect, and trust. So I think that's sort of the balance that I found that makes partnerships successful. And on the side of building the team, I think that for us, it was interesting because we started doing, you know, every single job from the start. You know, we were account managers, we were salespeople, we were ops managers, we were everything until we were able to fundraise. And like you mentioned, Laura, in Colombia 5 years ago, there was very small seed capital. There was really little seed capital. There wasn't a lot. And it wasn't until after 6 months after we launched that we started hiring people, but we couldn't afford paying consulting salaries or MBA salaries, so it wasn't until our seed round in December 2018 when we were able to really attract the amazing talent that we have today. Today we have a fantastic, extremely diverse team of senior managers. There's our head of growth is French. I'm from El Salvador. We have a very, very different backgrounds, perspectives. There's bankers, consultants, other startups. And I think that, to Nima's point of the hardships of recruiting versus other startups that have more money or other consulting firms, I think the way I've realized that is how I've found my best talent is definitely bringing them on board into executing a dream, right? You're not working for a startup, you're changing an industry, you're disrupting the way things are done now, and you're changing them, because you're never going to be able to compete with salaries or compensation of other startups. There's always going to be somebody that can pay them more or that will value them more. But if you really bring them on board, and it's also much more fun too. I feel like I have a lot of fun with my team because we're all on the same boat, and it's not like I'm figuring out all these challenges alone. I have a fantastic team that I know that if we have to pivot in 2 months, then this is the team to do it. You know, it's taken a while to build, but bringing them on board from the start to the dream and being extremely transparent with them about the things that are going well and the things that are not going well is critical.
Great. And Florence, just out of curiosity, do you have a stock option, how do we say, plan, or some kind of incentives for your key managers?
Absolutely. We have an ESOP, an employee stock option plan that both my co-founder and I separated during our first funding round, and we used most of it for our senior team and then some key developers. And definitely it's critical to use that in a very smart way. I know that a lot of the people that are in our team, like I said, could be better paid elsewhere, but they're here for the dream, they're here for the equity, they're here for the passion, and then definitely they're here for the growth. So I think that stock option plan is critical to them as well.
Great.
We have an option. Yeah, we have an option. We have an option plan that we actually offer to all of our employees. Even the most junior employees actually are part of the option plan. I think what's tricky is I fully agree with Florence's point about the mission driven. I do think that it's markets are just getting very competitive, right? So you have a lot of mission driven projects with spectacular cultures, with and just the amount of the talent there's not that much talent to go around, right? So I think giving benefits above market, we give benefits above market, we give equity to everyone. Equity is still a bit trickier to attract local talent, because now you're seeing the value of that equity, because now you're finally seeing excess and you're seeing all the secondary sales. You saw that with Kavak, you saw that with Bitso. So for the first time, you're seeing that and people are valuing it. But I do think it's and I think it probably varies a bit by market, but just the hiring is very tricky, right? I mean, you have a lot of mission driven, kind of very well, developed cultures that are fighting over, there are very few people with experience in certain area, right? So I think the solution to that is to continue doing that kind of stuff. But I think there's going to be, getting out of the usual places for hiring. So, we hire in Mexico City. We have a tech hub in Merida. I think we're going to have to find other places, and then start also to have some of our staff remotely. Because if you just think about the amount of capital that has been pumped in Mexico just the last 6 months. Forget about it, the last 6 months. All of those companies need product managers. All of those companies need data scientists. All of those companies need growth marketers. I think it is a number one challenge that we hear about among entrepreneurs in Mexico, at least.
Yeah, maybe in Peru we still have a little more luck because it's not that competitive in terms of talent. But what is happening is that you have foreign companies that are hiring Peruvian talent working remotely. So I would say during the last year, it has become more competitive, especially for programmers. And yeah, we also in Prestamité, we do look for programmers outside of the capital, because in Peru, everything is very concentrated in Lima. So we would go to other cities and look for them. And especially the remote working has helped us a lot to find this kind of talent. And well, I have everything you said was really resonating for me. And for example, when you spoke about management depth, Nima, in Prestamité, we took 2 years to hire our CTO. Well, because we knew a little of programming, me and my co-founders, we had trained ourselves on software, so we were able to coordinate with the programmers directly. And also because you usually launch with an MVP that is not that technology strong, we were able to just begin our growth without a lot of technology. But yeah, we were very happy when we finally found our CTO. And I think it was worth it to wait 2 years because, as you said, once you have the wrong person at the top management level, it can be very costly in the future. And especially in technology, if you have a very good CTO, then kind of everything flows. You can even have junior programmers, but if they have a good head, it's going to be okay. But if you have very good programmers and a bad CTO, it's not going to be that way. So I would say, especially for the CTO, take your time, really do a lot of reference checks. If you have worked with him, it's better, but in our case, it was not like that. So yeah, this would be my first tip. And also something you said, Florence, about the values. In Prestamité, we have rejected very good CVs because we didn't felt the values and the alignment of the person as a human being with how we are used to work. And I think this is super important. And also something you mentioned, when you have an interview, you need to feel that you can have fun with this person, like that you will be happy to see this person every day, because you spend the whole day. Well, we used to spend the whole day in the office, and that's for me, as the values and the feeling well with the person, the feeling is as important as the CV, at least for my part. And yeah, well, this would be a little of my feedback on how we experienced it in Prestamipe. And yeah, we are, especially when you begin, you don't have a lot of resources, you can't offer very high salaries. So you need to find someone that falls in love with the problem you are working on. Maybe, I know that a lot of startups are mission driven, but maybe your specific mission will really appeal to this person. For example, we have a lot of employees that their parents are entrepreneurs, and they really feel connected with the mission we have to help entrepreneurs. But maybe in other cases, in the health sector or in your sectors, you can have a personal connection to the problem that is different, right? Okay,
yeah,
so
I would slightly just a comment that you made that sorry, I don't know if it's me who's got a huge echo. There we go. Now, I would slightly disagree with the comment about making sure that you like someone in the interview process and that you would like to spend time with them in the interview process. I think there's a risk that affects diversity in hiring. I think if we think a lot about, this will happen a lot in consulting, right? In consulting, it was the airport test, right? Which is, would you have fun with this person if you got stuck with them 6 hours in the airport because your flight got delayed, right? I think the tricky thing with that is, it might lead to the hiring manager usually connect and maybe have more fun with people that might be more similar to you. So you might get, so I don't know. I think early on, of course, you at the beginning, it's very natural because you're going to spend day in, day out all across all at the same table trying to figure things out. But I think as a company goes bigger, I do think it's very important that the hiring manager's kind of perception of the social interaction is not so much part of the decision-making process, because it worries me that it affects level of diversity in organizations.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned it, because, well, for me, having fun is not like going to party or no. It's learning every day and being able to collaborate on problems and finding solutions together. Like I was not referring to like going and have a beer, not at all. It's more on an intellectual level to be. You feel it's a person you're going to interact a lot and have this kind of connection. Yes, Florence.
I know. I just wanted to make I completely agree with Nima. I just wanted to make it clear that when I meant someone that you can have a beer with after a very strong argument, I meant my co-founder. But in terms of, and I do think that co-founders have to have certain level of, I don't know how to say this in English, but it would be like a certain level of, yes, empathy, but ability not to take things personal. And the fact that you can disagree and challenge the other person and not have the relationship negatively impacted, I think it's critical, because then otherwise, if everything's taken personal, then resentments start to build and then nothing moves in the right direction. That's sort of what I meant when I said, make sure that you're aligned more in terms of values and alignment with your co-founders. But to Nima's point, I have hired a lot of people that are very, very good that I didn't even like in the interview. So I completely agree, because I think that the liking bias is that's what it is. It's you end up hiring people that are like you and that think like you, and that hinders diversity. So I just wanted to clarify that.
But I think that's fascinating. And I think it's something that we talk a lot about, because I think all of us think we're better hirers than we really are. We definitely thought we were good hirers, and we're learning that we're actually hiring is really tricky, and we all think we have a gut instinct. And I think, it's the wrong perception that many of us have. One of the things that I think we've learned is this concept of not hiring because of their lack of weaknesses. This is actually something that we learned from Ben Horowitz in this book about The Hard Thing About Hard Things, but to hire them for their strengths, right? And I think many times when it comes to this thing about, the interaction, is you're hiring someone because of the lack of weaknesses. Like this person is not going to be a pain. This person is, But I think, I think as a company grows, you just need the best sales guy out there. You just need the best marketer, and that person might have weaknesses, right? But those weaknesses, is something that it's part of the cost of having that person on board, right? And I think when you're trying to get that world-class talent, that's what you need, right? You need just the best at something, which necessarily might mean that he would be a really annoying person to go and have a beer with. That's okay, as long as it brings in those big accounts. And I think that's a lot. That's why I find fascinating the whole concept of hiring, because hiring has become so difficult in Mexico, right? And also just because it's just such a key part. It's so hard to translate capital into talent. And it's so hard because it's probably one of the most important decisions. And it's a decision with little information that we keep on getting wrong again and again, right? So it's something we have a whole panel just talking about hiring.
Yes.
It's fascinating. Huh?
Great. Yeah, it's because I think my definition of having fun is because I'm a little like an entrepreneurship nerd. So having fun for me is just working, and especially if during the interview I learn something from the candidate, for me it's a very good sign. And if he disagrees with me, it's also a very good sign. So great, it's just so interesting. And as you said, we could speak about that like during 2 hours. Maybe because we are arriving to the end, I would like to ask you if, as a foreigner in a new country, all entrepreneurs face difficulties. We know that. But I wanted to know, as a foreign entrepreneur in a new country, did you identify some challenges that are a little different than for a local entrepreneur? Who wants to take this one?
I can go first if you want. For sure, right? So I think there's 2 types of foreign entrepreneurs. There's foreign entrepreneurs who don't know their market and are starting from zero. Like I have no idea how they do that, because that's there's just too much things trying to figure out at the same time. And then there's foreign entrepreneurs who've been in the country for a few years, like ourselves, and then decide to start a company. And I think the main things for us, the main challenges were there were some cultural aspects that we had to learn, such as in Mexico, no one says no, right? So everything that you pitch, everyone kind of says, "Oh, that's interesting. Let me think about that." And of course, that gave us a false sense of, "Oh, wow, everyone loves this, everyone loves the product, everyone's going to invest," and so on. So I think there's kind of some cultural kind of learning curve that goes through there. And I think secondly is there's especially I'll talk about, our business is B2B, and figuring out how to sell to large enterprises in a country where there's a lot of mistrust and is very heavily relationship based takes time, right? If you're a foreign entrepreneur and you've not been brought up with, have gone to the same schools and to the same, hanged out with those people who are now making decisions at some of these top companies, navigating how to get through those is quite a challenge, right? And I think especially in B2B, in large enterprise, I think that takes time. And for an entrepreneur to start from scratch, I think it's very difficult. I think you have to build your own ambassador or network program to help you accelerate that process.
Definitely very aligned with Nima's point. Nima, to what you just said at the end, I think someone once told me that as co-founder of the company, I'm always going to be networking, and I feel like that's the best phrase I've ever heard of my life. You're always, even if you're not fundraising, but you're always almost fundraising, and if you're not networking, you're always really networking. And I feel like you leverage that a lot when you're starting a company and you're not a native. I think that on that specific point, I was very lucky because my co-founder was local. So there were a lot of mistakes. And not only is he local, this is his second company. So I feel like there were a lot of mistakes that we could recycle not making, and because of his prior experiences. But I mean, I still think it's hard for a foreigner to gain credibility, to go pitch at these huge companies or to these funds and gain that credibility that a local already has because of of their contacts, their network, the school they went to, the friends in common. I think that it's always going to be a barrier. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's harder. On the flip side, I think that in scaling the company, we went from Colombia to Panama to El Salvador to Guatemala, and now we're going to Mexico. And I think that the flip side of having a foreigner in the founding team has sort of questioned a lot of the assumptions, right? Because to my co-founder, it has to be done this way. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. That's not the way it's done in other countries. For instance, a stupid example, but when we launched in Colombia, we launched the way you earn and redeem your points is with your cédula, your national ID number. And here, everybody knows it by heart. And everybody in the team just assumed that in every single country that we were going to, everybody knew their national ID number by heart. And that was, an easy assumption. And obviously it's not like that. That's not the case in Mexico. That's not the case in other countries that we operate. And it was just those little cultural things that having someone question them brings a lot on board to the team, having someone who thinks differently from the start. So that would be our experience.
Right. And Florence, have you had a situation where the cultural difference was an issue, or you had to adapt to something more in the social interactions, maybe? Well, you are Latino, so
yeah, that's exactly what my answer is going to be. I can't think of one thing that has been particularly different to me because I grew up in the Latin American culture is the same all over, so it wasn't that big of a shock for me. No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I can tell that for me it was a shock because, France is kind of more Latino than maybe Germany or UK. But one thing I had to learn a lot is to give feedback to people and not be like that direct, but really try to find a soft way to say things. But I would say this has made me a better person because if I go back to France, I will continue to have this kind of I say things, but in a soft way that can be more accepted by the person. And I really think I have improved on that because at the beginning, I think people were kind of scared of me because I was so direct that they would think I would be cold or something like that. So yeah, I feel I have really improved as a person. And well, this would be my major cultural issue I had, I would say. And for me, being in finance, I would say that being French has been more an advantage. For some reasons, people would maybe trust because there was a foreigner in the team with Peruvians. It was very important for the Peruvian, let's say, clients that the team was Peruvian and the company was Peruvian. But they would appreciate that one member of the team would be maybe a European. So for me, I would say it has been very positive. And what you said about networking, I think it's very relevant in Latin America that networking is key. But I would say more for B2B companies. In my case, because we are B2B, but we target very small entrepreneurs. So it's a little different. It's more like a consumer kind of marketing. So it's not so much one-to-one. It's more like using digital marketing and contents and everything. So here I would say that I would not be able to do it on my own without my Peruvian co-founders, because all the marketing, the contents, the way you present things to the public has to be in my case, in a Peruvian way, and in a way that local will feel connection with. So I would say that especially for marketing, having a local team of marketing team has helped me a lot to reach this audience. Okay, great. What else do we have? Let's see. Right. So maybe we can close with a very interesting issue that we have already mentioned, which is fundraising. I would have two questions. First, do VCs, venture capitalists, or maybe business angels see the fact that there is a foreigner inside the founders as an advantage, as a disadvantage? Have you had some issues because of that, or has it helped you maybe to raise funds? And maybe just in general, if you can give some tips about fundraising in your country, because I know it's different. In Peru, it's very different from Mexico. It's very different from Colombia. Just some tips to the audience, the entrepreneurs that are listening to us. Or if you want also to give some comments for the investors that are listening to us, give them some feedback. This is your opportunity, guys. So who wants to begin on this one?
I can start. So more to entrepreneurs, and I'll talk about Mexico. And as you point out, I think the startup ecosystem is in very different stages in different countries in LATAM. I think in Mexico, it's as hot as it can get. So to entrepreneurs that are thinking about starting projects in Mexico, I think start building those relationships now. Right. I mean, I do think it's very important to build the relationships before you go and ask for money. Start asking for that advice, building those relationships. Choose very carefully your investors. I think there's a unique window now where there is just so many investors looking around that you will be able to get nice rounds, nice valuations, big amounts, and I would take advantage of that. So I would start with just very ambitious project. I think it helps to have foreign entrepreneurs who have relationships with VCs outside of LATAM also, and have relations with corporate, and are able to hire staff from outside of LATAM and bring it to LATAM. But I think the biggest advice is go now, right? I mean, it is a very hot market. Go for very ambitious projects and take advantage of the current window. We don't know how long this window is going to be open for. This part of the LATAM ups and downs. So go.
Great. And Florence?
Well, yeah, very, very similar to Nima's, but in not wanting to repeat myself, I think that the one advice that I would give in terms of fundraising is focus on the numbers, make sure you have the metrics, and start networking early, very early. It's never really too soon to start networking. You don't want to get to a VC with a cold call. You want to make sure that you're friends with a couple of CEOs from their portfolio companies. You want to make sure you have a crystal clear story to tell. And you want to make sure that you've rehearsed and practiced and communicated your vision with your team, and you have a very easy way to communicate it to the VC, because they're seeing thousands of pitches every month, and like Nima said, it's a great time to be fundraising in Latin America. It's definitely much better time than 5 years ago or than 4 years ago. So it's really taking advantage of that and starting to network early. I would think is the best advice I could give.
Yeah, and just to close the question, I would say to the entrepreneurs, try to get some traction, do an MVP, get some numbers, have something to show that is more than a PowerPoint, have real clients to show. And the second one to investors is come to Peru. There is a lot of opportunities here. It's kind of from 5 years ago. So yeah, I would really invite the funds to come to Peru and know the local entrepreneurs and know better this market. So now for closing the panel, I would really want to thank you so much, Florence, for this amazing conversation. I have learned a lot myself as an entrepreneur, and I see a lot of similarities between our experiences. And now we have the keynote science and technology-based venture in the Pacific Alliance. So thank you very much to all for joining us, and see you at the next opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.